Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover the invisible, super rigid architectural rules that govern the words we effortlessly speak every single day. You know, we rarely ever think about what our mouths are actually doing when we talk, but behind every single sound is this deeply structured, almost mathematical world of linguistic physics. To show you exactly what I mean, I want you to try saying this common word out loud. Restricted. Go ahead, say it. Now, have you ever stopped to wonder why we naturally break it up as restricted instead of, say, restricted? Seriously, try saying restricted right now. It feels incredibly clunky, right? It almost feels like your mouth is literally tripping over itself. Well, today we're going to solve this everyday mystery. As you'll see, our mouths are blindly obeying hidden linguistic laws without us even realizing it. So here's our roadmap. We'll start micro with the anatomy of a syllable, move into the physics of sonoricity, figure out how we draw the boundary, look at some wild word borrowing clashes, and finish up macro with the layers of stress. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, anatomy of a syllable. To really understand speech, we have to start with a fundamental building block, the syllable. Utterances aren't just random strings of sound, right? They're highly structured. Think of a syllable like a tiny piece of architecture with 3 distinct anatomical parts. First, we have the onset, which is made up of your opening consonants. Then comes the nucleus, the absolute core of the syllable, which in English is typically a central vowel or a diphthong. And finally, we have the coda, your closing consonants. Together, the nucleus and the coda form what phonologists call the rhyme. Now, here is a universal rule of the English language. Every single syllable absolutely must have a non-empty nucleus. The onset and the coda can be totally empty, but that vowel core is mandatory. Let's look at the word strength as a perfect example of a really complex single syllable. I literally want you to feel the anatomy in your mouth as you say it. Strength. Your mouth starts with the onset, navigating 3 whole consonants, the S, T, and R sounds. Then boom, it hits the nucleus, that E vowel, the core of the word. Finally, it closes out with the coda, the ing and thus sounds. It's an incredibly complex maneuver, and your brain and mouth coordinate the whole shebang in a fraction of a second. Now, depending on that coda, syllables basically fall into 2 categories. You've got an open syllable with a completely empty coda, meaning it ends right on the vowel, like the word see. And then you have a closed syllable, where a consonant cleanly shuts the door at the end, like that sharp T in sit. Moving smoothly along to section 2, the physics of sonoricity. So what actually determines the order of the sounds inside that syllable? Well, it's sonoricity. You can think of it as the invisible gravity or the inherent loudness of individual speech sounds. Every single sound you make has a specific rank on this sonoricity hierarchy. At the absolute top, we have dark vowels like ah and o. These are the most sonorous. They practically roar. As we move down the list, that sonoricity drops. We pass through medium sounds like R, M, and L, down to low sonoricity sounds like a buzzing Z or a popping B. Finally, at the very bottom, we have voiceless fricatives and plosives like S and P. Compared to the mighty vowels, these sounds barely even whisper. And this hierarchy, it dictates an unbreakable rule of syllable structure. Within a syllable, sonoricity must strictly increase in the onset, peak in the nucleus, and decrease in the coda. It's amazing. Every single syllable forms a literal sound mountain. In the onset, the sounds have to climb upward in sonority. They hit the absolute peak at the vowel nucleus. Then, in the coda, they have to taper back down the mountain. This perfectly explains why you can start a syllable with tr, climbing from a plosive t up to the much more sonorous r, but you absolutely cannot end a syllable with tr. It defies linguistic gravity. Which brings us to section 3, drawing the boundary. So, how do our brains instinctively know exactly where to chop multi-syllable words apart? The secret lies in a fascinating linguistic principle called maximize onset. Think of this as an invisible force field that just shoves consonants to the front of the next syllable whenever it's legally possible. Basically, if there's a consonant stranded between 2 vowels, your brain strongly prefers to attach it to the beginning of the second syllable rather than the end of the first. But, and this is a big but, it only does this if that consonant sequence is a legitimate way to start a word in English. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it finally solves our opening mystery. Why do we say restricted and not restricted? Well, look at the middle of the word. We have the consonants STR. Can STR start an English word? Yes, absolutely. Think of the word strive. So the maximize onset rule just shoves that entire STR cluster into the second syllable. But wait, what about the CNT later in the word? Can an English word start with the sequence KT? No way. It strictly violates the laws of English phonology. Since KT is illegal as a starting point, the boundary is forced to split them up. It leaves the C sound in the coda of the second syllable and pushes the T sound into the third. And your brain is calculating all of this math instantly. All right, on to Section 4, word borrowing clashes. So what happens when the building codes of English crash into the codes of a totally different language? Pure chaos. Different languages have completely different phonotactic rules. For example, Spanish strictly prohibits starting a word with an ST consonant cluster. It's straight up illegal in their linguistic physics. So when a Spanish speaker encounters an English word like strange, their brain automatically fixes the structural violation by adding an E at the beginning, making it estrange. They're literally creating a brand new syllable just so the S can safely act as a coda, allowing the rest of the word to proceed legally. French speakers actually had a similar aversion to the est onset, and looking at the history here is just fascinating. Let's trace the timeline of the Latin word for star, stella. In Old French, just like Spanish, they added a vowel to satisfy their syllable rules, turning the beginning into est. But as modern French evolved, they decided to completely delete the awkward S consonant entirely. That's why the modern French word for star is étoile. The S was literally erased from existence just to satisfy the structural rules of the language. And hey, if you think that's strict, consider the number 1. That is the absolute maximum amount of consonants allowed at the very start of a Finnish syllable. Just 1. So what on earth does a Finnish speaker do when confronted with a loan word that has 2 opening consonants? They simply delete the first one. Take the old East German car, the Trabant. It starts with a tr onset. The Finns creatively adapted this word by completely dropping the T, turning the onset into a simple R. Then, because Finnish words strongly prefer to end in vowels, they tossed an I at the end. The result? The beautifully butchered but completely legal Finnish pronunciation, rabanti. It's amazing how languages will retrofit borrowed words to meet local building codes. Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 5, the layers of stress. Let's zoom out for a second from those tiny syllable blocks and look at the macro rhythmic patterns they create across whole words. Just like sounds group into syllables, syllables group into larger units that phonologists actually call metrical feet. And within these feet, certain syllables are given more prominence, which we hear as higher pitch, greater loudness, or both. Phonologists map this out using something called metrical stress theory. They measure the weight and prominence of syllables using this clever visual system of crosses. It perfectly shows how our mouths are calculating weight and rhythm in real time as we speak. Let me guide you through this simple procedure because it turns highly complex acoustic phonetics into this really easy visual stacking game. Okay, at layer 0, every single syllable in a word gets 1 cross, just for existing. At layer 1, any syllable that is heavy, meaning it has a coda or a long vowel, gets a 2nd cross. Finally, at layer 2, the syllable that carries the primary lexical stress gets a 3rd cross. Whichever syllable has the tallest stack of crosses, that's the one we emphasize. And this brilliantly illustrates just how powerful stress really is in English. Just shifting that metrical stress completely changes the grammatical function of a word. When the stack of crosses is highest on the first syllable, we say protest, the noun. But if we shift the tallest stack to the second syllable, it becomes protest, the verb. Think about that. The letters haven't changed, the syllables haven't changed, but the invisible architecture of stress transforms the word entirely. It's a real game changer. Our source summarizes the sheer complexity of this speech architecture beautifully, pointing out that stress isn't just random, it's governed by rules. And as we build larger and larger words, the stress shifts dynamically. For instance, adding a suffix like tation acts like a magnet, literally dragging the primary stress to a completely new location in the word. Combine becomes combination. Your brain executes this complex mathematical recalculation of syllable weight and stress placement without you having to spare it a single thought. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today in this explainer, from the mountainous peaks of sonority down to the strict building codes of syllable boundaries and the rhythmic stacking of metrical stress. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The next time you speak, will you feel those invisible architectural forces shaping every single syllable in your mouth? I really hope you do, because the structured physics hidden within your own voice is nothing short of miraculous. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.